Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
So this morning at the 11 o'clock service, we'll be celebrating our graduates, high school and college graduates in particular. And so I was thinking about what words I could give, in that sort of commencement speechy type genre. And it occurred to me that it feels almost required these days for any sort of commencement speech to talk about how fast changing the world is today. There's, the obvious current sort of disruption and foreseen disruption caused by large language models and artificial intelligence. Then, of course, there's just the increasing dynamism and adaptability of the U.S. economy, which has continued to grow despite shock after shock, which may be good in all sorts of ways, but for someone who's in that sort of constant change and adaptation, it can be sort of destabilizing. You can feel like the rug is getting pulled out from underneath you if you have to sort of change your job or change where you live every 5 or 10 years. And so the advice that's usually given to our young graduates in these sorts of things is you need to be, yes, an expert in whatever you do, but also well-rounded. You need to be versatile. You need to be able to pivot your career. Do not expect to have the same career for your whole life. And normally these stories will come with examples of what some people call late bloomers, people who didn't come into their own until later. So one example that I recently learned lately was of the famous, home and garden celebrity cook, Ina Garten. Some of you may know of her cookbooks. And she actually worked in Washington on nuclear energy policy until she was 30. And decided that she wasn't enjoying nuclear energy policy and wanted instead to cook for people. And that's supposed to be sort of this inspiring, type of example. But if I were a young person hearing this, and you start thinking about it, it actually can be sort of anxiety-inducing. I mean, think about it. Not only do you have to be a world-class chef, you also have to have a business degree from GW and know nuclear energy policy. Not only do you have to have your expertise in your career, you need to be good at a bunch of other things just in case. And if you're the type of person like I am, where you're very type A and want to sort of plan your life long term, that can just be sort of dizzying, this idea that, you don't know where you're going to be in even 5 years. So be open to all options. How can young people in particular expect to have to plan for things like when to start a family or when to save up for a house if they don't even know what job they'll have in that short a time period? So I think I'm going to avoid today the usual advice about being well-rounded, about being willing to pivot, about lifelong learning, even after you finish school. Although I think all of those things are good things to do. Instead, I'm going to bring up my actual sermon on my iPad. Not the one I gave last week. Instead, what I want to say is that actually things haven't changed that much in recent years. That things are not that different from the old days, and that the very thing that people needed a long time ago is the same thing that people need today, that all people need today, which is faith. First, faith that there is a God who is calling you, and also faith that there is a God who is calling you. In other words, everything that you are, who you are right now, and wants your unique experiences to contribute to his kingdom. So let's talk more about this. On the first point, today's Old Testament reading, which we read at some of the other services, is about the call of Abraham. So just to refresh you, so Abram, as he's referred to before God makes promises to him, gives him a new name, Abram is living in northern Syria, more or less, the town of Haran, and he's called to the promised land, to the land of Canaan. It's probably about 400-ish miles journey. It's a long time to do without a car. It's a big journey. And actually, we're told that Abraham's family had come from probably somewhere in modern-day Iraq before then. So he's already a little bit, unsettled, and is then told to continue this journey, this long journey. And we sort of read these stories today and go, yeah, like that's hard, right? I mean, we're even told that a lot of his extended family stays behind. When he looks for a wife for his son, he wants to send him back to his culture, and he sends his servant to look for the wife in Haran. So he clearly leaves home, right, to go to this new land. But we go, as hard as that is, it's the Old Testament. God's showing up all the time. Abraham's getting all kinds of visions from God. He's probably used to this by now. He knows things are going to go well. This is how things were, right? But we today couldn't possibly live with these sorts of demands on our lives, these sorts of calls. But that's actually not what Abraham's story is. In fact, one commentator that I read pointed out that if you take literally Abraham's ages given throughout the text, you notice that God's only appearing like every 25 years. And there's a lot that's happening in those 25 years. There's he's having confrontations with people in this new land. His nephew Lot that he took into his house sort of as a son, it appears, is getting into all kinds of trouble. And God doesn't really show up all the time to help. And then, even when God is showing up directly and giving him instructions, God is not actually giving him a lot of really necessary information. So the author of the letter of Hebrews in our New Testament points out that when God shows up to Abraham to tell him to go, he doesn't actually tell him where exactly to go. He just says, go to the land that I will show you. We get this image of someone I'll tell you when to stop, just keep walking. Or famously, when God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, right? We get this sense that Abraham seems to have faith that things will work out. But God is not giving him that information. God is just saying, do what I say and let's see how it goes. And yet Abraham, we're told, and in particular throughout the New Testament, Abraham is used as this pinnacle of faith. Abraham did not waver. He did what God asked of him. And that's hard. And it's no different for us today. Because the fact is, like Abraham, we're not told what the destination is when we set out, when our call happens. And our young graduates will probably feel this acutely, right? Like they know that they're taking this step. It's what we're celebrating today. This big change in life is happening. And yet, could any of us even tell them where it's likely that they're going to end up today? No. We are told, even as Christians, that God will make all things right in the end, but we're not really told how or when, importantly, despite many people thinking they know when that's coming. We're told just that God has this call on our life and that somehow we are part of bringing God's kingdom down to earth. And that's the call on us, and we don't really know much more. So the fact is that today, our young graduates are in no different position than Abraham was, and than any of us throughout history have ever been. What we've always needed is that faith that God has a plan for our life and that we are called to fulfill it. So that's my first point. So my second point is that, like I said, that God is calling you no matter who you are or what you've done. And this is important because I could hear people, as I do the whole kind of cliche God has a plan for your life thing going, okay, that's great for super qualified people like Ina Garten with her super qualified MBA, turning celebrity chef and so forth. But what could I possibly have to offer? Or you don't know, Josh, as you're up there talking, how I've lived my life. And I think our gospel reading is a great response to that line of thinking. So we hear about the call of St. Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. The way tax collecting worked in the Roman world generally was that there was a set sum that he needed to raise from his area and remit to either the governor or some of the portion of that goes to Rome. I don't really know the details of our own tax code, let alone the Roman tax code. I assume it was pretty complicated back then too. But the point is that Matthew's salary would have come from his collections. In other words, if he's not collecting enough, he's not getting paid that much. And the flip side of that was, if he collected maybe more than he needed, then he was getting paid more than he probably should have been. And so the view of tax collectors back then, even of tax collectors who did their job, at least they thought honestly and collected what they were supposed to by law, the view was that they were scam artists, that they were trying to collect more than they needed because they wanted to pad their own pockets. I kind of think that maybe the best comparison these days would be used car salesman. It is perfectly fine, and if there are any used car salesmen in here, I want to emphasize this. It is perfectly fine to be a used car salesman, and there are probably plenty of honest used car salesmen. But the reputation exists for a reason, right? There's this constant suspicion that you're never quite being told the whole truth, and that those margins are just going to pad the pockets or the coffers of the used car salesman. And so Matthew, used car salesman Matthew, is probably thinking of all the people for Jesus to have recruited for this new movement, why me? Like Matthew would seem to be a huge liability on the Jesus movement. Jesus is trying to start a popular movement, not one full of used car salesmen. It seems like this is going to go poorly. And yet, as you'll see in this passage, immediately after, we're not told how much time's passed, immediately after the call of Matthew, Jesus is having dinner, and who shows up? A bunch of tax collectors. And so if you'll allow me to fill in the story, I don't think it's too much of a jump to suggest that perhaps Matthew is getting some of his friends, maybe the guys he used to hang out at the bar with, and they'd sort of commiserate about how everybody hates them. He's getting some of them to show up to this dinner with this person who just showed up and called him, right? Like the day or maybe hours later after Matthew's call, he's already using what he had in his background to bring people to Jesus, to literally bring people to Jesus. And not only that, but in this story, to give Jesus the opportunity to preach that the gospel is not for everyone who has it all together, that the gospel is not for people who are confident or competent in what they're doing. It is for the rest of us. It is for people who feel like their baggage is weighing them down, people like Matthew, whom people at that society would not have invited. Certainly, if they invited him to a party, they'd say, try not to mention the used car salesman part. You know, like that's the world that we are able to read about, all because of Matthew's call, his response to the call, and that he used what he had to offer to build the kingdom. God will use every part of us, even our greatest weaknesses. God does not waste anything. And so that's what I want to say to you today, and to the young people in particular. Returning to our celebrity chefs example, Ina Garten's big hero, which probably won't surprise you, was Julia Child, the television chef pioneer, right? And what I found interesting is that Julia Child also had a job in Washington before becoming a cook. There seems to be a pathway for this. Julia Child worked in what was basically a precursor to the CIA during World War II. She began as just like a typist. I think she wanted to been a novelist. So she'd, kind of written some, I think it was like children's books, didn't really take off, but she had the typing skills. She had like a good liberal arts education. And so she goes in sort of in a secretarial role and is like super smart and gets upgraded to a researcher. And actually I learned this in reading before this morning that she developed shark repellent that is still used today in the kitchens of what was, again, essentially the precursor to the CIA. That was her first experience in a kitchen, was developing the shark repellent. She did not end up actually cooking meals until her late 30s after marrying her husband, and she had to cook for him. That was her introduction, right? So we have this late bloomer story. But what I love about this story is that we see parts in those early moments of her life that were failing, whether it's the writing or even, sort of working in these stinky shark repellent CIA kitchens. We see things that she ends up using later on, right? Things that, the writing, things that was a hobby of hers that, again, by all accounts looked like it was failing, ends up coming back when she's writing cookbooks that are bestsellers. And so the point is that whatever it is that you feel called to do, keep at it. Do it well. Do it to the glory of God. God will use it. Don't try to outsmart God. Don't try to plan everything. It's not possible. But know that whatever you do with your hands, do it to the utmost ability. Do it for the glory of God. You are enough. God is calling you even if you wouldn't call yourself. So as Jesus said, I've come not to call the righteous, but sinners. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.